All right, folks. Some technical difficulties, but here we are. And I just want to welcome Reverend Dr. Dennis Edwards to this conversation on his book, Might from the Margins.
Yeah, thank you.
You all to see that. And welcome all those who have logged on for this very important conversation. I know we're not the first one. You've already been on a roll. You have one tomorrow. And so it's really exciting to see that this book is really getting some traction. So
yeah, thank you. But every conversation is a special one. So thank you.
Well, good. I'll receive that. So just wanted to say that for those of us at Jesus People, it's been really important to be in these conversations. I would say even before the time that we're in, that issues of justice have always mattered to us.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in our Cornerstone magazine or with our bands, or with our books, those have been places to talk about issues of justice along with many other issues that should affect us as a body of believers. Mm-hmm. So to be in this conversation is very natural and sort of the next iteration of us being a part of these conversations. So thank you again. You know that if we weren't in COVID time, we'd be downstairs at the Wilson Abbey with treats and close and having tons of friends here. So that celebration is saved for later. But we do celebrate your book.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be fun. And I've been there before for my friend Adam's book and Adam Gustine. And that was a fun night. So yeah, one day.
One day. So we'll plan that. Some point. So being in Uptown Chicago, I do want to give acknowledgement of the land. We're guests here, so I do want to acknowledge them, acknowledge our place before we go any further. We respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Peoria, and Potawatomi peoples. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all original peoples of this region. And we lament the broken promises made to them and their systematic marginalization. And we thank them for their generous hospitality by holding space for them at this gathering. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we get started with discussion on the book, you had sent me a brief bio and I was like, wow, if this is brief. No, I'm just amazed at all that you've done. I'm like, oh my gosh. What I've done could fit in probably two sentences.
Well, I'm old, Tiana. I'm old.
A little bit older than me. So Reverend Dr. Dennis Edwards is currently Associate Professor of New Testament at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago. He's the author of 1 Peter in the Story of God Bible Commentary Series. What is the Bible and how do we understand it? And Might from the Margins, the Gospel's Power to Turn the Tables on Injustice. Dennis has been married to Susan Steele Edwards since 1982. They are the parents of 4 children and grandparents of 4. Dennis has over 30 years of urban pastoral ministry experience. He most recently served as senior pastor of the Sanctuary Covenant Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Prior to that, he was the founding pastor of Peace Fellowship Church in Washington, D.C., associate and then lead pastor of Washington Community Fellowship on Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., and founding pastor of New Community Church in Brooklyn, New York. Dennis holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Cornell University and has been a high school science and math teacher. He also earned a Master of Divinity degree in Urban Ministry, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, as well as a Master of Arts and PhD degrees in Biblical Studies from Catholic University of America. Dennis enjoys playing his flute and saxophone, as well as weightlifting and cycling, much as his body will let him. So
yeah.
That's
getting tougher. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
So thank you for sharing that. So you and I had talked on the phone over the weekend, and I was giving you some highlights and some questions and perhaps an idea of where the conversation would initially start and maybe where it would go. And I said one of my favorite parts was as I was reading the endorsements at the beginning, everyone is saying wonderful things about the book, really kind things that you challenged. And then I get to the last one and I loved this one because there was a hook in it for me. It says, Dennis Edwards highlights how the gospel is God's power to lift every valley and make low every mountain. Some readers will find this book troubling and upsetting. Others will be filled with hope and courage. What a bold, beautiful, and incisive message for a church that God wants to transform. And that's from your friend, Nijay Gupta.
Yeah.
And I think why it hooked me was the troubling and upsetting. There was something about that of course I saw it initially as, oh, somebody's going to be upset and I get to be I get to read about it. And I was probably a little too excited as somebody that doesn't mind controversy or situations that have conflict in it. So I was just like, what's he going to write about?
Oh, good for you.
And was very excited. So, of course, that was a hook right away. And as I started reading, I was even more excited because in the first, in the introduction, you write, "Shoot me if I ever work for white evangelicals again." I said those words to Susan, my wife, around the time I finished 6 years of pastoral ministry at an overwhelmingly white church in Washington, D.C. So shoot me if I ever work for white evangelicals again. I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to imagine your wife's face as you're saying this to her.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And so I knowing that some of the stories that are going to come in the introduction, and quite honestly, I got stuck on the introduction. That's really a lot of where our conversation is going to center because we could have a session per chapter. But there's just so much meat, even just starting out in the book. But I'm just wondering, knowing that you were working in this church in DC, knowing that that was also based on some scenarios that happened in that church. I'm wondering if you will talk about the youth group situation and even what brought you to saying that.
Yeah, I will. And thank you for sharing all of that, Tiana, and for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I want to preface by saying, while I do tell some stories, they're from different places. Some of them are from, my pastoral ministry in this church in particular. But I don't want to make it sound like they're the only place where I've experienced some trials and struggles. So I don't want to make them out to be the bad guys in the story, as it were. Although so my kids struggled at that church, my older ones anyway, and so I just try to be honest. I mean, it's an experience that I had. So the story I tell there, and people can read it, but I'll outline, is that we had a conversation in the fellowship hall of people who had teenagers and then church leadership. So we were called elders and then the pastoral staff. And the youth group leaders were very tired of working with church kids and neighborhood kids. Those were their language. The language was our kids and the neighborhood kids. And so they wanted to make sure that the youth group didn't have neighborhood kids in it, which to me, raised all kinds of red flags for me. Partly was, how would they know a kid was a neighborhood kid? It was sort of a euphemism because the neighborhood in DC was largely Black, and almost all the kids that were coming to youth group from the community were African American, and the church kids were largely white. So to me, right away, it signaled this racial division that people surprisingly were comfortable with. So I mean, the night could have been really short, but I opened my mouth and started talking about how problematic this was for me. But I was surprised that I could not find a person in the room who saw the issue like I did, which was, we were really alienating these kids based on race. One mother said, well, my son, our oldest son, said him by name, said he could come to the youth group. And I thought, well, I work for the church. I certainly would hope my kids could come to the youth group. But the point wasn't whether my kids were allowed to come to the youth group. The point was this separation they were creating between us and them, which I thought the function of the church was to not have that kind of division. But the short version of a very painful night was that by the end of the night, I proposed that, if we're going to just let those kids go, we need to let them be in a youth group. So I said, can it at least be separate and equal? And I said that on purpose. And one person in the group said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if we're going to push these kids out, I want to give them the same experience in a youth group that the white kids or church kids are going to have. So I actually had my associate pastor job description changed. So I worked with the neighborhood kids, and I started volunteering as well as using my my ministry time to work with the kids in our neighborhood. So that was one experience, though, that wasn't just that I had the experience. It was just that it didn't seem to be a problem. And
Mm,
that's the thing that really haunted me, was that, it'd be one thing to say, okay, Dennis was struggling in that church and we can make it about Dennis. No, it was bigger than that. It's an issue that folks were not seeing the racial inequity that was being uh, proposed at that meeting, and was going to be sustained for some time afterwards. So to be fair, things changed. I became the lead pastor, and I wound up hiring an associate pastor years down the road. But even in that role, as me as the lead pastor, there was a significant segment of the population that was uncomfortable with an African American lead pastor, and I butted heads with people continually over ministry to the quote unquote neighborhood versus the church people. So I wound up resigning after my 6 years at the church. It was a very tough time, and I think part of my uh, words to my wife there about, shoot me if I were, wasn't just that church. It's
right.
just that I had worked in white evangelical circles before, and now it was like everywhere I go, it seems to be this place of difficulty communicating what justice could look like for folks who are really preserving a status quo. So yeah, that was a lot of what was behind it.
Their loss. Oh,
Mhm.
very painful.
Well, Tiana, when you said that just now, their loss, that was actually an interesting way that you say that, because
Mhm.
afterwards, we had some people stop by our house, as I had wrapped up my ministry there. I didn't know where I was going. In fact, I resigned without a job, and we had some people drop by, and one family, that was the conversation that we were having, was that this church, this is years ago, could have been really quite a powerful model
Yes.
of interracial ministry and working with suburban, urban folks. I mean, just a reconciling work, in many ways. And rather than, do the hard work of living into that, it
Mhm.
was sort of like, just put the kibosh on it. And so that lost language was what we were saying back then, is that we lost something that we could have had really special. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, and I'm thinking of the conversations I've been in recently where again, not going to say any names, but churches that with the death of George Floyd are near the area. I don't know if you were on that call. It was a call through the seminary, and we were discussing it. And one of the students has said that the church they were working with just did not want to deal with
Mm.
being near that
Wow.
the memorial basically, and it was such
Wow.
an opportunity. And there were certain books that the church was trying to engage in, and there were people that were like, nope, and I'm going to find another church. So
Yeah.
again, just that, that was however many years ago for you, but to know that in these spaces there are still people that are like, nope, not having that conversation, not
Right.
addressing those issues. And in your book, a big part of it is centering the voices of people of color, but a lot of the frustration, a lot of the pain is, especially when there's, white evangelicals who are not further down the road in this conversation, who are not wanting to be, is the pain is very personal. The pain is very traumatic.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
hearing you say that again, however many years ago that was, and
Right.
just knowing that with George Floyd's death, that some of the same talk and the same
Yeah.
sort of, oh, that, the churches over near that area who want to deal with that, or black
Right.
churches over there. And just knowing that that's still a uphill battle that exists.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, as I got older, my older kids who remembered that church well, they would almost joke with me from time to time. They say, "Dad, you got to write the book. You got to write the book." And I pushed things off for like 20 years because I thought people would just be mad at me and say sour grapes, and Dennis has just had a
Mhm.
negative experience. But I started to think about more than just that church. I started thinking more broadly about my Christian experience, and then experience of many other people, what I was reading in scripture versus what I was experiencing. But then what made it really powerful for me to finally put the pen to paper, as it were, was what was happening in our world.
Yeah.
So, and this is prior to this last summer and protests and
Mhm.
such. So I mean, I finished the book a year ago. So there was what you're saying about the relevance of it. I found that to be the reason why I needed to write, because I said there's a generation of young leaders now, the age of my kids and such, and maybe a little older, who are feeling the same things that I felt, experiencing the same things, maybe just with slight variation. But I think the main lessons are the same. So I appreciate you pointing that out. We're still dealing with these things.
We are, absolutely. And this in the introduction, like I said, I really got stuck on the
Sure,
introduction because
that's
there's
fine.
so much there. So maybe we need to plan some more some more times of this where it's like take each chapter. But you talk about thinly veiled racism in predominantly white spaces, and people who are working in churches, and there's just that little hint of, oh, I don't quite want to hand this over, and how not just you, but others have said this to you, of just like, this church is saying they want this, they want leaders of color, they want me to be a part of the leadership, or they want me to be part of some measure of responsibility, but do they really? And so you also with that talk about this idea of accomplice versus not versus, but accomplice and ally. So I'm just wondering two things.
Yeah.
About navigating that space. What would be your insights there for somebody who, like myself even, who Black person in predominantly white space, and other folks who have that experience where people are saying, I want this, I want, to be an ally, I want to be an accomplice, yet that's not always what we see happening. So,
right. Well, thank you. I mean, in many ways, that's why I wrote the book, was because I wanted us to start having more conversations. And when I say us, now I'm talking about people who've been on the margins, African Americans, other ethnic minorities, to say it that way, women, people with physical disabilities, all the folks that the predominant culture and the sort of the mainstream of evangelicalism tends to overlook. I kind of wanted us to have a conversation about what does our power look like. So that's partly why I wrote the book. But my quick answer to you is to say, and I've said this to friends of mine, friends who are pastors or serving in predominantly white spaces, is that there's always going to be the temptation to somehow mute yourself, or as a friend of mine says, and I put it in the book, to bleach yourself, to somehow make yourself more accommodating to the white folks so you can preserve a space. I mean, I when I was at that church, I had bought a house. My wife and I bought a house on Capitol Hill. So, I mean, I didn't want to have to leave that church. I mean, I had to pay a mortgage and whatnot.
Right.
So you have those responsibilities, right? And so part of you says, what can I do to make sure I don't ruffle any feathers? And so what I say is, don't think that way. Right. You have to be your genuine self, who God made you to be, and bring with yourself all that is part of you, the history, the culture, the legacy, all of that, and realize that your voice matters. So you bring your voice, you bring your full self. And if you take any kind of quote unquote hits for that, that's on them, right? And in many ways, if they really want to be an ally, or the language I use was accomplice, because they'll go down with you, and ally says, yay, and that accomplice says, all right, we in this together,
Exactly.
So yeah. So if they are truly that, then that means we're going to be, they'll hopefully receive, and I say in this case that they would be predominant cultural folks, white folks, would be willingness to listen more and govern less. So I think if I'm in a space now, and I feel that I'm at an age where I've earned this right to speak, and I've done some things that I feel like I'm in a setting, and I love my work at North Park. And I feel like one of the reasons why I'm happy to be there is I feel like I have leaders who listen to me.
Yeah.
Administrators who listen to me. I feel like I have a voice there. If I didn't feel like I had a voice, I'd be gone, because I have too much experiences in the Lord, and my culture is part of that if I had to stifle who I am, I'd be gone. And I think that's, yeah. So, I mean, I'll say it that way. So my encouragement is, be who you are.
Yes. And I want to say before we go on, if anyone has any questions or comments for Dr. Edwards or Dennis, he said I can call him Dennis because we know each other.
Yes,
Dennis,
that's right.
Please put it in the chat so that those can come to him. And, you mentioned North Park. So that was one of my questions. You are a professor there. I am a student there.
Yeah.
And, Yeah, you chose to stay in or chose to, in this case, chose to come to
Hmm.
a predominantly white seminary. And
Hmm.
again, thinking of your comment to your
Yeah, yeah,
wife,
right, right.
I'm glad you're still with us.
Yeah, thanks.
that, that she didn't shoot you. Um, but but I think you did answer the question, that in
Yeah,
that space you're listened to, you're respected. And so can you say more about our
yeah.
faculty,
Well,
maybe the students?
yeah, no, I can. I mean, happily. I mean, part of it was, to be honest, there's certain, I mean, evangelicalism is a big tent, and we're struggling with that now
Yeah,
because, the media sees evangelicalism one way. Uh, as an African American, I rarely use the word, but when I'm around white folks, I use it sometimes, evangelical. But the reality of it was, if evangelicalism is a big tent, then I want to be in a safe space under that tent, right? And a safe space for me is a place that where my voice is going to be respected. Now I'm old enough now to have a little more discernment about it, like, but it's because of all those experiences I've had in my life earlier on. There are some places that I would be really reluctant to go, even if they had an open door and needed a faculty member. I know now, if they're eagerly looking for an African American faculty member, sometimes that's actually a red flag to
yeah,
me.
yeah.
So I tend to be really cautious. One of the reasons why I'm comfortable being at North Park is because I have some history with the Evangelical Covenant Church. I know people in the Covenant Church, and the Covenant Church tends to be, at least, on paper and in a lot of places, more than just the paper,
Right.
uh, serious about issues of justice
More and more.
and racial justice,
Yeah.
also. So because of that, and I know some of the leaders, there are a fair number of people of color in leadership in our denomination, I was comfortable coming to the Covenant Church. But notice I had like a criteria, right? I was
Right.
running a list of things in my mind over, is this a safe space for Dennis to be? And not like they're so, like I'm so great that of course they want me. I don't mean it like that at all. I mean that wherever I go, I need to be, able to be true to who I am,
Yes.
and hope that I can have make some kind of meaningful contribution there.
Yeah. It reminds me of something Dominique Gilliard, our friend, had said to me, that also there will be Black people who are called to be in white
Hmm.
spaces. And so
Hmm.
I think I can handle that with what you're saying.
Hmm.
If it's I'm
Yeah.
called and you're going to treat me however, that probably won't work. But if I'm called and there's also the respect of my voice and what I bring,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
giftings, then I think it's different to navigate it in that way, because there's the respect and also the calling.
Yeah, I mean, I everybody's got to make their own decision, and I say in the book, excuse me, that I would never begrudge anybody, any person of color, an opportunity for growth in their career, in their calling, in their ministry. So I would never tell anybody where to work, but I would say that, um, my concern and my antenna does go up, because there's a sense of, I've experienced it too much, and I'll say it this way too. If you've ever seen, this book called The Elusive Dream, and I reference it in my book, by Corey Edwards. I don't think we're related, but she's a sociologist, and wrote a book. Well, she's written a bunch of things, but this particular book called The Elusive Dream is about multiracial churches, that have African American or people of color in leadership. In her studies, she mostly did African American leaders, and how the churches still functioned to center white voices,
Mm,
because even with African American leadership, the church could be multiracial only to the extent that white people would stay.
mm,
So if things happen in the church that white people didn't like, they'd be the ones that would call the meeting, say they didn't like Sister so and so shouting, or they didn't like the way we, went too long, or whatever kind of things are like that. And I've had those kind of experiences where
mm.
people complain about, whether the music is too long, or we singing too much black music, or that kind of stuff. And so if the white folks get upset and wield the power, then you're only multiracial to the extent that they're comfortable with that, right? So, like I said, I'm not going to begrudge anybody where they work and all. And yes, you can be called to be in those spaces, but I'm always saying, but check what's going on,
Yeah.
check what's happening to you, and check what's happening in the space. Is the space influencing you more than you're influencing the space? Are you there for the brochure cover? I mean, so I respect the calling part
Right,
of it,
right.
but I also say if the thing, the entity, whatever it is, church, ministry, whatever, is going to be what they say it's going to be, then they need to make sure that they're going to let your voice be heard fully. And I
Absolutely.
have too many friends like me who got bumped around. We have I'm going to say one other quick person. Some of us have you might know my friend Ed Gilbreth, who
Mhm.
works now back at Christianity Today.
Yeah.
He wrote a book years ago called Reconciliation Blues, and this is years ago, and he tells similar stories about what does it mean to be an African American in white evangelical spaces, even though they say they want you,
Mm,
what can happen, right? So I'm just saying it's a caution flag, even though you might feel called to be in those spaces.
yeah, it is a caution flag because I sometimes get the not super often, but the random email about unity, which you actually talk about in your later on in the book,
Mhm.
or the random like, why are we talking about this? It's like because the race issue is still an issue.
Still an issue.
the
Amen.
injustices still exist. So guess what? It's going to be a conversation probably till we go on to glory and maybe beyond that. Hopefully not, but we will be
Beyond that.
discussing this. We will be discussing this. Um, so that willingness to let my voice, be heard as well
Amen.
as yours.
That's right.
So you referenced Black Panther, which I loved, and of
Yes.
course with Chadwick passing away, all the more I love that section.
Mhm.
And again, just another example of the need to center
Mhm.
voices of color. And
Mhm.
if everybody remembers the scene, it's where Agent Ross is going to talk with M'Baku and his tribe. And the minute he starts talking, they start barking. I love that scene. I could
Yeah,
watch
me
it over and
too.
over again.
Me too.
And there's such a message in that, where even Agent Ross, who I would say is at least an ally, probably an accomplice even,
Yeah.
he still thinks he can just come in and say the whole story and be,
Mhm.
the one presenting, and Mbaku's like not having it. And
Right.
so, again, that in that you talk about justice, not just, trickling down, but being more than that.
Mhm.
And it kind of fits in with that scene of, well, one, Agent Ross needing to be quiet and learn, but also this idea, I think you kind of put them together, this idea of justice, I'd have to look in the book,
Mhm. That's
but
okay.
of
Mhm.
justice really pouring
Yeah.
down. You talk about them together. So I'm just
Yeah,
wondering
I think
around
I
that.
think I do. I remember what you're talking about. Yeah, because I borrow from Amos about let justice roll, and when Amos does that, the picture is like of like a thundering waterfall that justice comes storming down, and there's times when I feel like we now meaning all Christians that I can see in the states from time to time having conversations about justice, and that's across the spectrum, left to right, but it means different things. And more on the right, there's a caution. You hear the word justice, they get nervous because they start thinking about political candidates and people that they
Right.
don't want to support, and it gets all messy that way. But this notion that things need to change and be fixed and be made more consistent with God's kingdom for people to experience God, that should happen powerfully and not be a reluctant thing to happen, at least for God's people. So that's the justice rolling versus trickling, right? There's people who are willing to say, okay, well, it's nice if I can have a few Black people in my church, and then for them, that's justice. Isn't it nice that these people are coming, right?
Yeah.
And I'm justice rolling down says, no, we upset the table here, and it's like Mary and the Magnificat. The poor he sent away, and the I'm sorry, the rich he sent away, and the poor now he's raised up. So it's something that's pretty stark. The Agent Ross situation is that you do get this helper, you get this person who has access to resources and such, but he seems to assume, anyway, I don't know what he thinks, but his character seems to assume that, of course, being the Westerner, being white, being, with this powerful country behind him, he can just start talking and tell what's going on. And it's sort of that space we're sort of used to. And I would imagine even the moviegoers who are not paying close attention wouldn't be surprised if Agent Ross did speak and start to explain what's going on. It's like we're used to the white guy doing that, right? So when they started barking, I was like, whoa, this, I mean, I wanted to stand up in the movie theater and cheer because I said, I get this. I mean, I'm of a place where white guys younger than me still feel like they can talk over me and take over because they presumably know more and they just assume it. And so I just found that scene to be powerful.
Oh my God. It was healing.
Yeah, yes.
Really healing. Loved it. Awesome. We have a question.
Oh, cool.
That's come in. Okay. There's like 3 questions in one.
Okay.
Okay. So how would you place ECC in the journey toward true diversity and anti-racism? Let's start with that one.
Where I place it, I mean, like on a spectrum or something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't surveyed enough organizations out there to know like where we would fit on the spectrum. I feel like the Covenant Church, at least in policy and in some level of procedure, is pretty serious about wanting to see the Church of God in that broad sense, not the denominational sense, but in the broad sense, to see God's church be more of what it should be. So I would say they're moving well on the journey. Now, I don't know the church across the country, and I've been in the Covenant Church for less than 10 years, so I haven't seen the church across the country. And sometimes around North Park, maybe things are skewed because I'm in Chicago and I see a certain picture of the church. So I can't say across the country. So I'll plead some degree of ignorance, but I would say from what I see in writing, people I meet in leadership, there's a pretty serious commitment among a fair number of people to push things forward and to be a voice for justice. I know I'm not naive. I know that there's people who have what comes out the home office of the Covenant Church and probably has no intention of caring about that. I mean, we still have sisters who we ordain women in the Covenant Church and been doing it for over 40 years. And there's some churches that won't call them. I know that happens. So, and I know there's some that the justice language is interesting, but they're not having it. I mean, I know that exists. I'm not naive, but I would say there's still a fairly good groundswell of people who are serious about the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, I would agree too. Mm-hmm. What do we need to work on as a denomination? What should our goals be?
That's big and sweeping. I mean, I don't know in what sense. We have that seems like a very family kind of a question. So that's okay. I don't mind. But that's big. That touches on a lot. And I'm not in the denominational leadership, but I would say we have these affirmations. We have 6 affirmations. We're not a very doctrinaire kind of a place, but living into our affirmations, we also have what we call a 6-fold test of how we want to celebrate and embrace our diversity. So I would say the more we live into those things, the more we help our superintendents and pastors understand those things, I say the better and healthier we'll be, because I feel like those are good values and good perspectives. And so I don't want this to turn into a lesson on the ECC, but I would say if you go to the website, covchurch.org, you'll see the 6-fold test. You'll see our affirmations. And so I would say those are good values to live into.
Awesome. That's great. Mm-hmm. All right. So I have a couple more questions here. Mm-hmm. In chapter 5, it's called The Power of Anger. Probably a little too excited about that. But there are certain things that I just love.
That's all right.
And why I like this chapter is so many people with anger want to just make it this bad emotion, or, we know right. about an angry Black woman, or that's that man's right. just being, and you embrace it actually in this chapter. And so just knowing that there's the 2 instances where Jesus was angry. That's right. I'm just wondering, will you talk more about that? You give us 2 examples, 2 very specific examples, but I guess just the importance of Jesus being angry, but also why was that necessary to put in there? That one chapter necessary, but also Jesus as being somebody who's been angry.
Hmm.
Just the
Yeah.
importance of that.
Wow, thank you, Tiana. When you said, even just kind of in passing and almost joking about this trope that we have, this stereotype of the angry black woman, I've seen it also, the angry black man, and I've been dismissed that if I don't say things in a tone that white people can receive, or if I say it and sound angry to them, then they can dismiss it. Sort of like
Mm,
they can take this presumably higher road that as a Christian we shouldn't be angry.
mhm,
And I've heard that many times. Um, and so I tried to listen to the scriptures as well as to some experts. So you see, I do cite in there some people who are more expert on these things to talk about the role that anger plays and being true to who we are as human beings, right? And even the Ephesians passage, be angry but don't sin,
mhm.
don't let the sun go down on your anger, don't give the devil a foothold. There's people and the experts will argue that that's a command, be angry. And folks who try to work it around and say, well, God doesn't want you to be angry. um, that's when I decided to say, well, you know what? There's a couple of places in Mark's gospel where Jesus, the translation will say angry or indignant,
Mm,
and he's clearly frustrated over something. But so the emotion, as the experts say, is a secondary emotion. It's a trigger, right? So you got angry because of something, right? There's something else back going on there, and I think that with in the two stories, one is Jesus is healing this guy with a withered hand, and when he's about to heal him, the folks that are the religion experts, Pharisees and those kind of folks, they're upset with Jesus, and I mean they're going to watch to see if he's going to do this on the Sabbath. Jesus is angry with them and he heals the guy, right? And and then it just seems so obvious. And I think that Mark is just making it really clear that Jesus is angry because those religious folks are more concerned about the Sabbath laws than they are about the guy with the withered hand. They're
yes.
more concerned about their law and order than they are about a guy who's actually in need. And that's what I've been finding kind of consistent with the way I see some segments of evangelicalism operate. It's like they set up what they see as law and order,
Mm,
and don't even see the folks who are in need. So they get upset about folks marching in the street because it's not law and order, rather than asking why are they marching in the street.
yes.
And so I feel like that's why Jesus gets angry at injustice, and he gets angry when our concerns are misplaced.
Mm,
The second one is when he's angry. He's indignant. It says because they were preventing children from coming to him. And Jesus says, "Let the children come. The kingdom belongs to such as these." Right? It says he was indignant when he said this. So he was mad that they wouldn't let children have access to him.
mm,
Wow, that says something beautiful about the
yeah.
Lord. He's welcoming the children, and he's mad at the folks that won't let them come.
Mm,
So I say it's right to have anger at injustice. You're in the same league as Jesus. Um, but you're having anger at injustice, not just because your feelings got hurt. I mean, you're angry because there's something that's not right, and you can maybe be a part even of fixing it.
oh, that's good. That's good. It's crazy though, because I do think when it comes to people of color, and
Hmm.
in our case, Black people,
Hmm.
it doesn't seem to always filter through that Jesus filter, or Jesus got angry, or we're
Hmm.
allowed to be angry. It gets filtered almost through something else, and I think that's where I have a problem. Is again, the angry Black woman or the angry Black man. It's like, how did it get filtered through that? Can it be filtered through there's an injustice experienced, or there was an injustice observed, as opposed to all of a
Right.
sudden, because I'm the skin color, like that,
Right.
that to
Right.
me is where it's like,
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think that's a tool, unfortunately, of some white folks to dismiss us.
mm,
So it's become a caricature. If you're an angry Black woman or angry Black man, then you belong in some category of militancy that the white Christian doesn't have to pay attention to. And yet, at the same time, right now, today, they're paying attention to the white guys with guns who can storm the state capitol in Michigan and even threaten to take the governor, and they'll give them a pass, to a large degree. So I'm saying, and that kind of anger is not working the righteousness of God. That kind of anger is destructive, is and dismissive of anything that you might want to call Christian. I'm not talking about anarchy when I talk about anger, but I am talking about the way Jesus works through our emotions to bring about not giving, as Paul would say in that Ephesians passage, not giving the devil a foothold. So when we let our anger get worked out, which is not letting the sun go down on our anger, we let it get worked out, then we don't give the devil a foothold.
Oh, that's good. And hopefully when the anger is there, it can be filtered through the circumstances or what's going on, as opposed to any sort of color,
Yeah, no, I
What
hear
is
you.
going on here that is causing this person to be angry?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? Like the injustice, as opposed to filter through a color.
I see what you're saying.
Or categorizing, these folks as being this angry group, as opposed to, like you were already saying earlier, what is causing that anger? Let's
Yes,
even
yes,
get away
yes.
from
I
the
see what you're
color.
saying.
What is causing that? And
I see what you're
I
saying.
think that at times when it's filtered through the color, it's like, what does that have to?
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know, Tiana, because I sometimes wonder if it's that the anger and the color go together because not everyone's can not others can't can't feel it and see it. So it's an anger that's associated with a lived experience.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I think that there is such a thing as black anger. My friend Esau, in his book Reading While Black, he has a chapter on black rage. He uses, and I think there's something to be said for the reality that our anger is coming out of a lived experience. So it's not anger in and of itself; it's connected to our blackness. So I don't have any problem with the black man being angry, but I have a problem with a stereotype of folks saying it. You know what I mean?
Good.
Yeah.
That's a good differentiation.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Got some other questions here because we're
Sure.
just plowing through.
Yeah.
This is great.
I could do this all night, but I know
I
we
love
don't.
it.
But we don't have all night. So okay.
We have about 15 more minutes.
I'll try to make my answers shorter. Right?
No, it's great. Folks, keep sending in your questions, and I guess I'm curious. Even before we get to this other one on the power of solidarity, but I'm just thinking of folks who have logged on, and a lot of friends have logged on. But I'm also wondering about anybody who's sitting here like, this is uncomfortable and this is painful, and just what, as a, especially specifically for white people, what do they do with that? When you're sitting here listening to a conversation between two Black people who have certain experiences, who've had certain, whose narrative looks a certain way. And so they get to sit in on our conversation, which is great, but kind of like, what is in it for them as far as the learning piece that they can get, pick up this book?
Yeah. I hesitate a little bit on that for a reason. I mean, partly it's that I want my white brothers and sisters to be wrestling with stuff. So it's not like I want to be dismissive of that, but my concern happens to be that for one, and I talk about this in the book too, there's this trope that you see in the movies, and Spike Lee talks about it, of the Black person's role in this movie. He calls it the magical Negro, but I know people might not be aware of that. But it's movies like in Green Mile, movies like Ghost, even he lists, and a few others, where the Black person's role there is to somehow make white people be better or to solve a white person's problem. So, and they might even have a gift or a super ability, like in Ghost or in Green Mile and those kinds of movies, and their super ability winds up being the thing that's helping the white hero in the movie. So sometimes I get a little concerned that even though I go through a lot of work to say I want to center the voice of people of color and marginalized people, yet I will always get the question of, well, what should the white person do? And I think, well, once again, I don't want to solve their problem when a lot of the problems we got into were their making. So I feel like they need to have a huddle and
Huddle up, team.
you're right, and figure out what's going on and say, hey, how are we collectively listening to the voices of people of color, many of whom, now not everyone, but many of whom are saying the same kinds of things. So I think that's part of the homework is to get together and listen to the voices. And then we have our white brothers and sisters like our friend David Swanson, who's written about rediscipling the white church. So here's a white brother who's trying to help other white folks to sort of, understand and get to these issues. And I say, great, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So don't look to the Black folks to try to solve your problems, right, in a way. So but I know for some people that can sound dismissive. So that's why I try to say it in a careful way. The problem is I used to, as a younger person, more stridently say, this is what should happen. And then I got dismissed, right? It's like, don't have to listen. He's angry, that's the thing, so they can easily. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not trying to fix your problems right now. I'm trying to get us to get, to rally together and join in solidarity with each other. So that's one of it. I shouldn't say one. That's basically it. But I would say, for those who are, I know mean well and certainly want to be part of what God's doing in the world, for everybody, there
Mhm.
can be, and this is the way Peter would say it, all of you clothe yourselves with humility.
Yes,
God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble.
mhm.
That kind of posture, humility, an ethic or hermeneutic of humility, if we want to call it that. I think if everybody embraced that, there would be much more listening than there would be
Yes.
defending. Yeah.
Oh, that's very good. I was thinking humility was the word, because I think you do use humility a couple times in the book and really expound on that. So that was the word that when you said it, I was like, that.
Thank you.
Exactly. So a question has come to both of us.
Okay.
Have either of you been fearful of naming your anger in the context of church, including your reputation?
Hmm.
Let me say it again. Have either of you been fearful of naming your anger in the context of church, including your reputation?
I'm not sure what they're asking, except I'm going to assume they mean something like, would my reputation be damaged by naming my anger? Is kind of the way I've taken that question. Like, do I feel like safe or comfortable? I think because I'm older, I do. When I was younger, I didn't. It was harder for me to name my anger in a church context because I felt like I would alienate people and they wouldn't understand. And that's part of the frustration of that opening introduction, is that I needed people to understand where I was coming from. I needed people to understand my anger, and I wasn't finding that in the church. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I would say I have been in the past
Mhm.
um, reluctant and even afraid. I'm less so now, and I think because I have a track record of ministry behind me that I feel, grace of God, I feel good about in the churches I served. I'm certainly not perfect in any way, but I've tried to be honest in my ministry, highlighting and explaining, or at least acknowledging my weaknesses, and I feel like I'm much more comfortable naming anger and not worried about my reputation so much.
That's good. Um, for me, I don't have time to care what people think. So,
Good for you. Good for you.
so there's probably times I'm a little bit too over the top, and it's like pull it back for different reasons.
Yeah. Well,
um,
yeah, good for you. Thank you. I
so for
wish
the
I was
most
that. I
part,
wish I was that emotionally healthy when I was younger. I wasn't. I
yeah,
was very cautious. I mean, I
yeah,
say that in the chapter on love. I was very cautious.
yeah,
And
you do
the
say that.
more I realized that God loved me, the more I felt confident
Mhm.
saying what I really, really believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, if I'm angry, it's just because I'm angry. It's nothing to do with anything to do with color or my reputation. It's like I just have to be mindful of not sinning in it,
Yeah.
whatever's going on. So
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
that's
I
good.
hear you.
Okay, so you got a question. Um, Dr. Edwards, what would you say to the young folks leaving the church in such high numbers? It seems due to the lack of justice work in evangelical church.
Yeah. A couple of things. One is I do have a little bit of a concern that when folks speak about justice,
Mm,
even on the left now, and where a lot of my young folks are, uh, that they don't have a justice view that's connected to Christ.
mm,
Um, I feel sometimes that they put too many eggs in the political basket,
mm,
and so it's easy to get frustrated with politics. It's easy, clearly, to be frustrated with the politics. I'm not saying disengage from politics. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you can't put all your hope there.
mm,
Is this just not the way the Lord operates? And his kingdom's not of this world. So I find sometimes that the folks who that there, there's an extreme on one side. I would say though that the hesitancy on the other side, if I could, hate to make it such a stark contrast, but on the right, far right, in the very conservative churches, the hesitancy to see anything as having political implications is very frustrating to those of us who know that structures need to change. And I think that's one reason why young folks are leaving. What I would hope for are for new wineskins, because we need, if there's going to be any church planting work, and I've been involved in planting 2 churches, then they can't just be this maintaining the status quo. There need to be churches that are willing to wrestle with these ideas and
Yes.
even look different than the traditional church. We put so much energy into smoke machines and work, and musical equipment and all kinds of stuff to try to, I don't know what we're trying to do. I think to compete with the world, whatever that is, and to make church be cool and hip. This was the 80s model that I came through, right? And the
Yeah.
mega this, everybody wanted to be Willow Creek, everybody. And I'm not trying, I guess I was cynical about it then, so I might still sound cynical. But the point, and I don't mean to be disparaging of anybody's trying to do good work for the Lord, but I'm just saying we put an awful lot of resources into things that are designed to get people into a building, and not nearly as much resources into building community, building solidarity, and working on the issues in our neighborhood. I dare say so many folks who commute to church don't even know what the neighborhood around the church building is like. They come, they do their thing, they sing, they get the shot in the arm when it's not COVID. And the shot in the arm, I meant that figuratively, but pretty soon it'll be literal. But you know what I mean. They get the boost,
Yeah.
and then they go back home. And I'm saying, I've been in urban ministry for too many years and I get frustrated with that. So that's why I'm probably a little animated right now, because the reality of it is it needs to be different. So I'm tired of seeing the young folks leave, but I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. I see it. And I have my own frustrations. So basically I'm saying, come on, let's get together. Let's create some new wineskins. Let's evoke an imagination of what church can be. Let's get, it can be so different.
Yeah.
And so I invite them to help shape the change. And
Yes.
if they're in a place they can't get a voice, then hey, I'm all for you moving to another place where your voice can be heard.
We need to set up that Zoom call. You could be on it. I could be on it. There's other friends
That's
of
cool.
mine who
Hey,
want it to look different,
amen.
who are just like, Lord, what is it supposed to look like in this time? Because it's not entirely working, or even sometimes even just the one pastor in front model's not totally working. It's like, or even just the stress that goes into making church, it
Oh,
shouldn't be like
I'm
that.
with you. Now, look, I'm at seminary. I want to train folks for ministry. I want folks to learn how to understand their Bible better. I want them to know their history, and I want them to know theology. But I want everybody to know that. I mean, not just the one expert standing up front. I want everybody to know that. So I think that people can get seminary degrees and wind up doing all kinds of things. They don't all have to be, quote unquote, lead pastors or senior pastors. But I'd love to see more people. I had people in my church in Minnesota who had MDivs, and I didn't know it, and I found out later. And I thought they weren't trying to take my job, but these were people who had theological expertise to some degree, and knowledge and such. They're very helpful in the life of a
Yeah,
Christian community. Yeah.
that's good. All right, I think we have time for one more question, um, which I think I'm just going to be one that's floating around in my head,
Okay.
which is just what would be if there could be a big takeaway?
Mm,
I first want to say for people of color, marginalized
yeah.
people who have been pushed aside, what would be their takeaway that you would want them to have from the book? And then white evangelicals, like I
Yeah.
do think the message could be different.
Yeah.
What can be the takeaways from this time and from this book?
Yeah. I think, and for the first group, for all of us on the margins, my big call is to say, look, let's work together to amplify each other's voices and help to change the shape of what Christianity, how it functions in America. I'm speaking from American context. So it's joining together, it's raising our voices together, it's supporting each other. I like the word solidarity. So that's my big call. I feel like some of us are struggling in our different areas and feeling the marginalization differently, and I want us to come together. So that's a big part of why I wrote the book. Um, as far as white folks, I think this is a pivotal time that for those who have ears to hear, this is a pivotal time to say, how do I steward this place that I happen to be? And I know a lot of white folks are like, I didn't create this, I didn't do this, but there's a reality. And the question is, how do I steward my gifts and calling and the privilege, relative privilege that I may have in this society. How do I steward that for the kingdom's sake? And I would say there's enough in the scriptures to help you answer that question. Um, so yeah, I think that kind of summarizes it for me. Mhm,
It's great.
mhm.
Well, I would love to pray for you
Oh,
before we
Tiana, man,
go.
I would love that. Thank you.
And there's a lot in your family, and yeah, I would love
Mhm.
us to end that way.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Dear Lord, thank you for my friend,
Mhm,
Dennis Edwards. Thank you for
mhm.
this book that you have given him the words to write. Lord, I do pray that people would be encouraged, that people who have felt pushed to the margins and people who have not had their voices heard or raised, Lord, that this book would be an encouragement to them, maybe even a challenge to them. Lord, for those that maybe haven't been on the margins, but have maybe been in a more dominant space, I pray, Lord, that you would use us in their lives to show them how they are to walk alongside us as accomplices, as allies, as friends. And Lord, I just pray that your kingdom on earth, Lord, that we would be responsible with it. And I just thank you for this time. And I just thank you for Dr. Edwards and the work that he is doing at North Park. I thank you for his family. I pray for continued healing there. And Lord, I just pray that he would this day be encouraged in you and just be so blessed by all that he's done in you, Lord. And I just thank you for him and his wife and just the kind-hearted, loving people that they are. And just I've been so blessed by their example and their marriage. And just pray that you would cover that household. In Jesus' name, amen.
Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Buy the book.
Yeah, thank you.
This is good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you all who logged on. This
Yeah,
is really
yeah.
good.
Thanks.